Hello, Gary Champion, Psychic Medium once again. I think this is going to be a good video because it's about legal and illegal. And we don't do that here. We just do trying to do right and wrong. So I have my expert here, Skylar, and she's going to point out some things legal and illegal. And we're going to go, that's interesting. So here's Skylar. Say something, Skylar.
Hello.
Yeah, that's you, Skylar.
Yep. Hello, everyone. Um, I have been in the judicial um, in the judicial field, and there's some interesting things about some of the stuff that's coming up in the recent decisions by the Supreme Court, and it's a little disturbing. It's a little disheartening because I don't know if most people understand, and I assume most people do, the three branches of our government, which is the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. And the judicial plays, an equal part, and they're supposed to oversee everything. And as Gary has pointed out in previous videos, we've got some Supreme Court justices along with some other things that are befriended by very wealthy people. Yeah, that may or may not influence their decisions, and it's kind of disheartening to see this because
I'm saying anytime someone pays you 200,000, 500,000 over a period of 30 years, they're influencing you.
yeah, I mean that there's a good chance that that's what's happening. And can I say 100% for sure? No, but is it the most likely? Probably.
Yeah.
And what's scary about that is if our Supreme Court is for sale, it's one
Yes.
of the tenets of our democracy, and they're the gatekeepers. They're one of the gatekeepers that look over the legislative branch, that look over what the laws Congress pass to make sure, and that the president's doing what he's supposed to be doing. And so they make their own laws also. Not only do we have laws made by Congress and your local municipalities and your local governments, we also have laws that come out of cases, and that's called common law. And there's a doctrine called stare decisis, which is basically you look at case law through the history of the United States, other laws of other countries sometimes, depending, like our law came from the United Kingdom because that's where we started as a colony for the UK or Britain. So anyway, this goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. You're talking 500,000 years. This is a case. You have cases that come out and they decide law, i.e., like Brown versus Board of Education.
Right.
Where integration, Virginia v. Loving, where it allowed integrative, interracial marriage. And it gave a privacy right to people that, wanted to have intimate relations. It's none of our business. These things, it's a living and breathing, our Constitution. And the Supreme Court, along with other federal judicial courts, they decide, they're the ultimate decider of what is actually passed as a law and what isn't. They're the final decision. And one of the things that's kind of disheartening, that as I started looking into it a lot more, I mean, it's been in the news, but the Supreme Court, unlike other judges, and attorneys are not held to a professional conduct standard.
Well, I
Attorneys,
didn't know that.
yeah, attorneys are held to a professional rules of conduct and ethical, which include ethical. And judges, all judges except for, I guess, the Supreme Court, do not have to be, they all have to abide by judicial rules of professional conduct. The Supreme Court, they say they review them and they'll abide by them, sort of, but they don't have to. They never adopted them, which is kind of
That's sort of like taking money and not having to report it.
right. And so
That's that rule. Yeah, who decided that
yeah,
rule? Well, we don't need to, we're okay.
and in an impasse, and it's kind of like our government, there was an unwritten set of rules, whether we're talking the presidency, Congress, whatever. Everybody it was an unwritten set of rules that they said, this is how we're going to act. And they pretty much followed it. Not that there wasn't somebody over history here and there that, was the exception to the rule that didn't put the nation first or whatever their job was, whether they were congressman or senator or the president or whatever. But they all kind of abided by these unwritten rules. Well, now we have a culture over the last 10 years or so. It was prior to that, but it's gotten worse.
Politics.
Yeah, and if it's not written down, then we don't have to abide by it. If it's not codified in stone, we don't have to abide by it. And so that's kind of scary for the the Supreme Court that doesn't. They say, well, we look at the judicial rules of conduct, but we don't have to abide by them. And those are really, but all the other federal courts do. All the other federal judges do.
It's interesting because the Supreme Court is the last place you can go with the case.
I know.
After the Supreme Court, there is no place to go, and yet they don't have to follow rules.
No, and this is what's getting in right now is getting litigated kind of in the press. It's not what I find interesting. It's a side note. You can find some of these articles that are being reported, but not many people are reporting them. And it's kind of like down in the hush hush. It's not the main headline.
Do you think it's too dull to report, or no one's interested, or you think they're being paid not to report it?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know, but it seems like it's being kept quiet, and I don't think people realize how important this is. That the Supreme Court needs to be held to judicial standards, like all the other judges and attorneys. I mean, attorneys are not even allowed to criticize. They don't have First Amendment rights.
Yeah, so I'll support and defend the Constitution of the United States. That's in their oath, right? Support, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. They're not even doing that one.
Yeah, so
that's a basic one, and they ain't doing that.
People say, like Scalia was one of the most conservative judges. There's kind of two thoughts of judges. It's not necessarily conservative and liberal, but it's like the ones that say the Constitution, what's in the Constitution, we're going to stick by that, only kind of what's written, and we're not going to expand it. And others say it's a living, breathing document, and it needs to grow. And that is what was in a lot of the papers when they were drafting the Constitution, and that's all the stuff that came around it, all the notes, what the founding fathers were thinking. They had decided things like that it's a living, breathing thing. It needed to be, it can be changed occasionally, but it's a living and breathing, so it can change with the time.
Well, that's like those amendments to the Constitution. They left that in there just in case. It's not set in stone. Right. We can change it if we want to. Whatever the right to vote. That's a good one. Right. That they didn't see. So black people were property.
Right. And so things change. And so that's allows it to change. Yes, you can make the amendment to the Constitution. They shouldn't have had to, because originally said all men are created equal, but that went
Yes.
out the window. They still had the slave trade. You know, they had to make an additional amendment.
I think that meant all white men are created equal. Black people were property. They weren't
So are
considered
women.
human. Yeah,
Women were too.
not considered people.
Yeah. They couldn't own property. They couldn't, you know.
Yes, women couldn't own property, couldn't inherit. It went to the brother, didn't go to the wife. You know, if a guy died and his brother took everything, she was left out because she couldn't inherit.
No. And so, you know, there are amendments to the Constitution that need to be done, but they allow that, but it makes it a difficult thing to do, to make amendments. There's a lot of steps, 2/3 vote of the states, blah, 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 to make.
That's why there's only a few of them.
Right. And that's why the Constitution is short and brief, but it's supposed to be a living, breathing document that's interpreted, and the courts interpret it.
I like that idea.
And the Supreme Court right now is this doctrine of stare decisis, which says, okay, it's everything that comes before all these case laws is what's making the law, and this is what the new decision that we're making in a case, no matter what it is. If you're talking about the Roe and the Casey, which got overturned recently.
Wait a minute, what is that one? Emma Casey? I don't know that.
Casey was 1992 case. And Roe, everybody knows Roe v. Wade, but
Yeah.
they also overturned Casey. Casey was another case that had to do with a very particular small part of abortion rights, but it had a few restrictions that they allowed in 1992. But it was very specific, and it didn't overturn Roe v. Wade. There was a very specific issue in that case, and so I won't get into it because it's long.
Well, but let's go into Roe v. Wade for a second. She came on television a few years ago and said that abortion should be legal, and went on and on about how it was all wrong that she won that case. Then they tracked the money. They paid her to say that. She admitted
Right.
that they paid her to say that. So what's this?
Yeah.
Follow the money. Everything is about greed and money. If you take money out of it, there's a lot more continuity and legality that should be legal instead of illegal.
Right. I mean, the money shouldn't be there. It shouldn't be in our congressmen and senators. Most other countries in the world, including England, or Britain, the UK, that's what we base ours on. They have 6 weeks of campaigning. That's it. They have laws that you can't campaign more than 6 weeks. You can't take money from blah, blah, blah. It's all a public system. You get some allotment, you know, because you don't want to buy influence. Not that there isn't somebody trying to influence behind the scenes in their House of Lords, which is sort of like our Senate, kind of, not really. It's based on generation and yeah.
Our
Anyway,
system is corrupt. There's money being put in bank accounts that these guys can use, but there's no record of it being given to them.
Right. And
people are taking campaign contributions and paying for the house with it. Some of those have been caught lately. That's illegal. Those are for campaign contributions. They're spending it going to the Bahamas. They're catching them at it. They're like, they're stupid. Are these guys the dumbest bunch of guys ever?
Yeah.
They are.
It's sad to see a lot of people that go into politics, and not all, that go into the House or the Senate, and after a career of maybe 3 or 4 terms or 20 years, all of a sudden they come out millionaires.
Yeah.
And how did that happen exactly?
Well, the funny part is they don't resign. They stay in until they take their pulse, and they no longer have a pulse. Then they're out of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
They don't resign with their millionaires. They just keep pumping it for all they can.
Yeah. And the Supreme Court was originally for life, so they wouldn't be influenced. But that's why the terms were for life. They weren't supposed to be influenced by politics or people and blah, blah, blah. Well, you know, this doctrine of stare decisis, all these laws, like when they overturned Roe v. Wade, and and other cases, which they just overturned the EPA yesterday, something about the water and wetlands and the Clean
Yeah,
Water Act.
yeah, that's a big one.
And I got to read a little bit more because it just came out and it was interesting. It wasn't even a headline last night, and it was 3 hours. Like
Well,
it had
people
just
right now are worried about
after.
people are worried about their jobs and money. They're not worried about the air being polluted. But down here in Texas, it is. It says so on my little iPhone. I put it up. It says the air today is of poor quality. So the weather people are being honest in the country, saying, "Oh, don't worry about that." Those guys are spewing shit out into the air because they can make more widgets, and we can all have a better life. Forget that your kids won't be able to breathe.
Yeah. There's a reason why a huge percentage of children growing up, over 30%, I think, and I don't have the exact numbers, so don't quote me on it, but kids coming up all of a sudden have asthma, have way more asthma than because of some of the air, some of the water quality, things like that. But when they overturn these cases, whether it's Roe, whether it's the one yesterday on the EPA, they go against this doctrine of stare decisis. And stare decisis is like all these cases before us led us to making this decision in this case. It gives the continuity that it's a legitimate, the judiciary is an active, legitimate piece of our government and our democracy. And you can count on it. And it's not just going to be willy-nilly. Today it's this, tomorrow it's blue, yesterday, and the next day it's red. You can't have a functioning government or a third branch of government making laws that change every other day or every other week or every other year. This has been law for over 50 years, like Roe. The Clean Water Act has been around since 72, which people don't understand. The Clean Water Act was put in by a Republican president. That was Nixon. I mean, he had all kinds of faults and personal issues and ethical things. But one thing he did champion clean water, clean air. That didn't used to be a partisan thing.
Are we supposed to forget that he was a liar? That he
no, not at all.
Did dirty tricks on anybody that was opposing him, ruined their lives?
Oh, no. But it tells you how far we've come in that clean water and clean air didn't used to be a partisan issue.
Everybody wanted clean air.
Yeah, I mean, they also I get it, they wanted to further businesses and promote business, and I get that. But they're like, we've got to have a balance or we're all going to be dead. I mean, you can't just poison without any consequences.
The planet can only take so much.
Right. So when they got rid of this decision that's been around like Roe for over 50 years, you're talking, they went against, there's 3 or 4 or 5, actually more case law. You can read the decision. It's over 200 pages. It's
which is why no one reads them. You can cut that down to a couple of paragraphs, I guarantee you.
Yeah. But the new case that just came out where they overturned Roe, they had all, there's anywhere from 3 to 50 cases that case was based on. That he just overturned all this stuff. And some of these decisions that Roe was based on was like Griswold. It was about contraception and having the right to have contraception and to make your own decisions as a family unit of whether you're going to have kids or not. It didn't have anything to do with abortion. It just had right to use contraception. Lawrence, relationships, same-sex relationships, Oberfeld, same-sex marriage, things like that. When you overturn a case that's been law for 50 years and other cases are based on that, I mean, there's a whole handful of cases that use
then it screws up the whole system, doesn't it?
Yeah. Even if it had, other cases had nothing to do with abortion, but they cited Roe for certain legal decisions that it has been established case law. Some of these cases have been around that Roe was based on, and then for over 100 years. I mean, you're talking, you got to have continuity in case law decisions, and to all of a sudden change them. And the sad part is Thomas, especially in his mentioning in the decision recently overturning Roe, mentioned that he's going to go kind of after these other cases.